Welcome everybody to today's meeting of the IOSH Environment and Waste Management Group. Today's session supported by the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. So some of you may have had a link through the CIWM website. This is one of our occasional series of meetings that we have throughout the year on topics of interest to each of you. And again, I hope that if any of you wish to have a session or a topic, please contact me through IOSH. There's a link there to our networks manager who will help us out, our relationship manager who will get in touch with us and pass that message on. Today, I'm pleased to say we've got Tim Small, who's the HM Principal Inspector of Health and Safety in the waste and recycling sector here in the UK. Tim will explain, he's been in post, I think, 18 months now. And this continues a long-standing relationship between myself, but also the EWMG, going back through inspectors such as Chantel Nichols and Paul Harvey, going right back to the early 2000s. And this is a very keen topic. It's actually in terms of the waste sector, the broad waste sector. And hopefully Tim today will explain some further thoughts outside of the normal discussion around waste collection. So at this point, I'd like to invite Tim to come and speak. There's a Q&A session, questions and answers will come into there. I will filter and have a look at them. There's also a chat box if you wish to make a comment and say hi. Please don't put questions in the chat, and please don't put generic chat in the questions. Okay, and I don't think any of you have got opportunity to speak and talk, so it'll be facilitated through myself. I have a colleague, Ben, in the background, making sure that if I fall down with a problem, he can pick up and keep things going. So at this stage, Tim, over to you. You want to share your presentation, and I will hide my video.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the intro, David. Ben will, just by way of information, Ben will be moving the slides along for me, so I will. I might need to subtly prompt him occasionally. So yeah, thanks very much for coming and making the time. I understand there are people from just not the UK, but also elsewhere in the world, so you're very welcome. Hopefully this will be of interest. As David said, I've been in post a little bit less than 18 months now, and it's a complex industry. It's a rapidly changing, it's a rapidly developing industry, and I'm still getting my head around some of the issues. So some of the examples I'm going to show you today are a bit historical. Consequently, I don't have all the details, so do bear that in mind and go easy with me. Okay, Ben, next slide, thanks. Okay, so a little bit about my background. I've been at HSE for 30 plus years. I started in engineering. I've also done health services. I've spent time on construction in London. I spent a year attached as a technical advisor to the Hatfield train crash investigation. And I spent a number of years dealing with gas and pipelines. So that's the transmission and distribution networks. And more recently, for about the last 5 or 6 years, I was involved with human factors in our major hazards division. And I'll touch on that as we go through, particularly looking at some of the case studies. And also I'll come back to you with some thoughts at the end, which are as a result of, some of the things I learned during that time. And yeah, since 2020, I've been involved with the waste and recycling sector. Okay, Ben? Right. Apologies if I'm teaching some of you to suck eggs here, but I thought it was worth just kind of giving you a bit of an overview about how HSE interacts with the sector. We do a lot of stakeholder engagement. Again, I'll come back to some of that in a minute. We also do some a certain amount of targeted inspection, which is driven by intelligence. So that might be intelligence about accident statistics, or it might be intelligence about poor performers. You know, we talk regularly with the Environment Agency and the devolved authorities in Scotland and Wales, and they will also give us intelligence sometimes. Might be prompted by complaints and also prompted by riddle reports sometimes as well. So obviously, when we inspect, one of the tools in our toolbox, as it were, is enforcement, and I'll be touching on a few examples of that in the presentation. We also do some research, so we work with external bodies where that's appropriate, and in fact we're just about to launch some research, hopefully in relation to the anaerobic digestion sector, which I'll come back to in a bit as well. So I've listed some of the partners that we work with. So the first one there is probably our most important partner, which is HSE, and there's a separate slide on that to follow. Environmental Services Association, local authorities, LARAC, other government departments. So some of those are regulators. So the first three in that list, EA, NRW, SEPA, etc., they're fellow regulators from the environmental perspective. And that's one of the things that makes this sector a bit unusual, because we don't do that in lots of other sectors, have that close relationship with EA. BASE and DEFRA are important for different reasons, because they set the policy. And what I've discovered in the last few months is that sometimes we find if we're not involved at an early stage of a policy, that can prevent us present a few problems down the line. So we're kind of working quite hard to re-establish some links with those two bodies, because they're very important, and there are some challenges coming up. Okay, we also work with manufacturers. So the best way of reducing the risks, particularly in relation to vehicles, and I'm going to come back to that in a bit, is by having the safest vehicle that you can have, and that means design for visibility. It means visibility aids and other technology. And the technology's really advanced rapidly in this area, and it's become a lot cheaper. So one of the things we're hoping to do is to kind of have some further discussions with manufacturers about that, as to whether things are optimal. We've also got trade bodies. So we've got British Metals Recycling Association, UROC, REA, which is Renewable Energy Association, and ADBA. So REA and ADBA are primarily concerned with anaerobic digestion. This is an area which has been occupying a lot of my time, and it's, as David suggested, it's a bit removed from the way that HSE has certainly conceived of the waste industry as being primarily to do with collection and disposal of waste. It's now we're now seeing much more use of waste to do certain things, such as generate energy. Again, I'll come back to that. Ben? Okay, so I said I'll come back to WISH. We do a lot of work with WISH. This morning I attended a steering group of WISH. So HSE and WISH are separate organisations, and WISH was set up approximately about 20 years ago, and it's very much an industry-run, industry-owned body. Everybody who sits on WISH and runs the steering groups and the individual working groups, they're all volunteers from the industry. So it's very much a way of industry owning its problems and its issues, as it were, and I think it's been very successful over the time. So there's a WISH has a strategic plan. There's a number of themes in it. The bullet points there don't align directly to the themes, but it's the essence of it. So basically, healthier and safer working places. Pretty much that's what it says on the tin. Health kind of speaks for itself. Safety, a lot going on to do with machinery safety, and I'll touch on some of that a bit later. Training and competence, obviously that's an important area. Futures and innovations is a really fascinating area, and I'll come back to that as well in a bit later. And lastly on there is supporting small and medium enterprises, and this is probably the hardest problem that we have to crack is actually how do we do that? How do we make people aware of the resources that WISH provides, and how do we support them? And that's a really difficult problem to crack. I'm just going to make a little plug here for WISH. WISH has its AGM on the 14th and 15th September. It's part of the RWM and Let's Recycle Live event, Birmingham at the NEC. And at the AGM, there will be the opportunity to take part in groups to discuss the themes in the strategy, to look at, for members of WISH and for others who are interested to come along and input, and also, most importantly, take ownership and say, yes, I can help with that. So anybody who's interested and is available, I definitely recommend coming along to that. If you have a look there, I put a link there which should hopefully work if you type that into your browser. Ben? Okay, yeah, and there's the WISH website. It really is a fantastic resource. There's a lot of high quality information on there. And in fact, you are generally much better placed looking for health and safety related information in relation to waste and recycling here than on HSE's website. Effectively, we've moved all of what was our guidance, or some of what was our guidance, onto the WISH website. And that allows us also to be a lot nimbler in terms of creating new content as well. Right, Ben. Okay, so where are we now? This is just a recap of some recent things we've had to deal with. COVID, I know, has been an absolutely huge issue, and it really reinforced the vital role of the sector in keeping the country running. The link I posted there, information 13, many of you will be very familiar with that. That's now at issue 11, and that was a hugely successful guidance rollout. That was done very quickly under a great deal of pressure. I have to say, I'm quite glad that I wasn't in the sector at that time, because I think it must have been pretty fraught producing this. Yeah, that's been well recognised as being a really, really top quality document, along with the supporting materials. So I've been doing a lot of work to do with net zero. This is UK government policy to achieve kind of net zero emissions by 2050. There's a lot of new and emerging technologies, and the boundaries between these technologies are not hard and fast as they used to be. There's a lot of bleed across between different technologies, which makes it interesting but also challenging for us to regulate. I think the other thing to point out is that recycling it's not just about collecting and disposal of waste by waste contractors anymore. It's a much wider activity, and most organisations that produce waste will actually be actively concerned about how they manage it, how they dispose of it, and how they minimise it, which is probably the most important thing as far as the environment is concerned. And a good example of that is anaerobic digestion. and that's taking not entirely but primarily waste, particularly on farms, slurry from animals and so forth, and using microbes to digest and break that waste down. That then creates two things. It creates a very quite a high quality fertilizer, which is the digestate that's left at the end, but it also creates methane. And you can do various things with that methane. You can put it through a CHP plant to generate electricity. You can actually split it, make it into hydrogen, or most commonly you can turn it into methane by a bit of further processing. So that's a really exciting technology. That's gone from kind of only a handful of plants 10 years ago to over 650. But with that comes some challenges. Any industry that grows very rapidly. And we mustn't forget that the thing it's primarily producing is flammable gas. So it has to be managed accordingly. Otherwise, you can have problems. The last bullet on that page there, the safety notice, which many of you will have seen. This related to wheeled loaders. These are widely used in the industry, and they're very adaptable and versatile tools. Unfortunately, they suffer with a number of problems, particularly to do with visibility, which is exacerbated when or if larger aftermarket buckets are fitted to increase the capacity. So when you're dealing with light materials, it's easily within the capacity of the machine, but it exacerbates the existing visibility problems with this type of machine. And the only real way currently to deal with that is by way of keeping vehicles separate. But that's not, as many of you will know, the strongest of control measures. So we'd really like to see more done on the technology front. Ben? Okay, so in HSE terms, waste and recycling is a high-risk sector. So we've got some statistics here for you. We've got an industry rate of 6.99 per 100,000 workers. That's 17 times the all-industry rate. And I think the other key comparator there is to agriculture, which is 8.47. So, construction, which is 1.62. So you'll see that relatively speaking, it's a very high risk sector. In addition to the fatal injury rate, there's an estimated 5,000 work-related ill health cases every year. Mostly those are, let me just think, 75% are MSDs and stress, and the remaining 25% are mainly respiratory or skin conditions. Lastly there, we've got a breakdown between kind of public sector and private sector. Just looking at my notes, just a quick point about the fatal stats. Last year there were only, so in the 2021 year, there were only 3 fatals ascribed to waste and recycling. But in comparison, in 2016-17, there were 14. So you might think, well, that's just an amazing improvement. What's been going on? Well, to be honest, I think those are really statistical variations because you're dealing with quite small numbers. It doesn't take much to suddenly double. So if we have 6 next year, we're effectively doubling what we had last year, but that doesn't mean the industry's got twice as risky. So just take the statistics a little bit, be a little bit careful where the numbers are small, because it's very difficult to interpret trends from very small numbers. Having said that, typically 20 years ago, the average numbers of fatalities a year were about 18. So the industry's really made some big improvements, but there's still a long way to go. Ben? Brilliant. Okay, so if you're interested, we produce this every year, or rather the wonderful people in our stats department do. Go and have a look if you haven't seen it. It's really quite useful. Right, I'm going to talk about some case studies now. So can you scroll the next slide on, Ben? Okay, so I thought rather than me just talking about statistics and kind of nebulous things, I thought I'd put in 3 case studies here so you can have a look at, okay, so what does all this stuff mean in reality? So the first one I'd like to talk about is this one, which is, and I have picked the worst ones here, so they are pretty gruesome. The failures are pretty gross. I mean, they're gruesome as well. But so we basically got, as it says on the screen there, we got a 23-year-old injured in a mobile agricultural, fatally injured in a mobile agricultural baler. Now, this is a really important factor. This was designed for baling animal forage, but it was being used to bale non-recyclable materials for refuse-derived fuel. So the issue here is about suitable machinery. In this case, it wasn't suitable. It couldn't handle large and rigid items in the waste stream. That caused frequent blockages. So pure Reg 4 talks about machines being suitable for what they're being used for. So a recurring problem that we find is the waste where there isn't a specific piece of plant made for the waste industry. The industry is very good at adapting. And unfortunately, the guarding standards to do with a machine that you might use in the middle of the field are not transferable to a machine where you're going to use in a much more confined industrial setting. So in this particular instance, because it couldn't handle these large waste streams, the baler was prone to blockages, which people had to enter the machine and clear out. Employees had little training, they had no safe systems of work, and the lock-off procedure was pretty much non-existent. So the important point to take away from this is that effectively there was no management of these issues. Keeping the baler running effectively became the employees' problem, and they improvised and they did what they thought was right and what they had to do to keep things running. So on the day in question, one person was clearing the blockage, and sorry, I missed a word out there, and was clearing the blockage in the helping to clear the blockage, and the other person was in the bale chamber. That's the missing word. And he inadvertently operated the baler because it wasn't locked off, and you can imagine what happened. So the deceased was a young father, as I say, 23. So it's a really tragic accident. The result was a 200k corporate manslaughter fine. So a couple of things that aren't on the slide. This problem was long-standing. The company made no effort to adapt or replace the baler, the other thing was that there was a second baler that was out of action on the site, so there was greater pressure to keep this remaining baler operating. So all of these factors drive the behaviour of the guys, the front line, the guys doing the job in poor conditions and with little knowledge. Next slide, please, Ben. Okay, vehicle rollaways. These are really, these are still going on. They happen every year. We get 1 or 2 every year. In fact, there's probably a lot more that we know of, where nobody is injured and it doesn't get reported. So essentially, they all tend to follow a similar pattern. As in this case, the driver leaves the vehicle, the refuse collection vehicle, to collect refuse. In this case, it was a car park in Watford. The handbrake was on, the driver was working alone. Okay, so the interesting point there is that the handbrake was on. If you look at the next, the third bullet point down there, it tells you what the problem was. I'll come to that in a minute. The vehicle began rolling down a slight incline. The driver then tried to re-enter the cab to prevent the rollaway, and he fell and was caught under the rear of the vehicle, which then crashed into a tree and caught fire, and he was trapped for 90 minutes and subsequently died later in hospital. I've seen a number of video footages. You can find them online of people doing exactly this, trying to get into the cab of a moving vehicle because they've forgotten to put the handbrake on, or it hasn't engaged properly, or there's a problem with the handbrake. They jump out, realise it's moving, and try to get back in the cab. Most of the time, occasionally they'll get back in the cab, but most of the time they don't, and the vehicle carries on until it hits something and then stops. Sometimes, and most of the time, people get away with it, but sometimes they don't, as in this particular instance. So the interesting point about this one was the interlock mechanism preventing the bin lift operations, whilst the gearboxes in drive had been deactivated. Now, I don't know what the reason is for that, but the judge was critical of company attempts to blame the driver and failure to know about the defeated interlocks. So one of the things to remember about interlocks being defeated or guards being defeated is the reason is to think about the reasons behind it. And the reasons behind it are usually to do with perceptions of speed. So in other words, it takes me X number of seconds to do this properly, or it takes me 2 seconds to do it the quick and dirty way. And there's, to an extent, that's human nature, but you have to manage that tendency by how you design your systems, etc., to encourage people to do the right thing. I'll come back to that a bit later. So there's a link there if you want to know more. It was in 2014, and it was, I think, the largest fine for a waste and recycling company ever, I think. Somebody, I'm sure, will correct me if I've got that wrong. Okay, next slide. So this one's pretty shocking. Interestingly, this is quite unusual. This is a proactive prosecution. We don't do many of these. In other words, there was no accident. So what prompted our inspection was a riddle report, which in itself is pretty extraordinary when you read the rest of this slide, that a company this bad could possibly have sent in a riddle report. Anyway, to quote from the inspector who took the case, the conditions were appalling. So what did they find? They found dangerous electrical installations, wires, plugs, sockets, burn marks, faulty isolation switches, unguarded machinery, plant machinery not safe, poorly maintained, probably not inspected as per lifting regulations. Waste bay walls seriously damaged, waste piles, teetering piles close to pedestrian walkways. The picking station was, and picking station itself and the access ladders were structurally unsound. I mean, you didn't need a structural engineer to see this. The damage to them was pretty obvious to anybody. The site office was resting on top of an air conditioning unit. You've got little segregation between vehicles and pedestrians to protect totters from plant and skip lorries. So an astonishing 9 prohibition notices and 7 improvement notices were served. And eventually the case came to court. and there was a £200,000 fine. So some more detail that isn't on the slides. The inspectors came onto site, everybody stopped working and retreated into a sort of dilapidated workshop area. The welfare facilities were pretty shocking, and there was evidence of people living on site in the workshop area. There was no clear manager or supervisor of the site, and the workforce was mainly migrants from Eastern Europe and India, with little English being spoken. HSE had previously issued enforcement notices at both the company's other sites, and despite this, they really hadn't had much effect. The company failed to attend court. They were tried in their absence. They provided a written submission in which they claimed they had an exemplary safety record. Just extraordinary. Right, next slide, please. Okay, so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what we've been doing recently in terms of inspection. So Q4 last year, so that's January to March 21, we ran an inspection campaign. So 849 visits were carried out to waste and recycling sites. The focus was very much on machinery safety and workplace transport. It excluded those rather kind of niche areas, and with a view to kind of really, not to keep the focus fairly tight on the areas which caused the majority of the accidents. Okay, next slide. So, there were uncontrolled risks identified in 322 of the sites. So that's approximately 40%. In HSE terms, that's material breach rate. So that means that these were clear breaches of, regulations. A total of 154 notices, so slightly less than 50% of those material breaches were rectified with notices. There are 41 PNs and 113 INs. So in bold there, we've got 31 notices on workplace transport, predominantly on safe site issues. And that comes back to what I was talking about earlier about segregating of pedestrians and vehicles. And then we've got 31 notices served on machinery safety. So the most common types notices where notices were served on balers, conveyors, shredders, and trommels. Okay. Next. Right. Okay. So we are also this coming year proposing to do some more visits, and slightly fewer this time. So it's machinery safety, 500 visits. And the important thing to note there is that that's going to coincide with some WISH machinery safety guidance, which has been in long gestation, and we're making a real effort to get it over the line. We've already published a document on safe isolations. There's going to be a companion document on that, to that in terms of general principles, and some subsidiary documents, but I'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. The anaerobic digestion, we did some visits this year already. We've done about 25 specifically. It's a bit on the fringe of mainstream waste and recycling, and it can occur in other sectors. So food waste is almost a kind of small micro sector of its own. Some food companies, paper companies, beer companies, breweries rather have anaerobic digesters on their sites to deal with waste from their processes. as do farmers. So it's one of those technology that cuts across a lot of traditional boundaries, which we tend to kind of operate with. So one of our challenges is to work out how best to kind of enforce this. So the entirety of anaerobic digestion currently sits with me, in addition to all the other things, waste and recycling. But hopefully we're going to distribute that to other bits of the organisation, or do it in a different way, which frees up my time a little bit. Ben? Right, sort of ongoing priorities, which are the sort of things that myself and my team are doing. So there's health, that's dust, bioaerosols, stress, mental health, as you heard, the latter two kind of, along with manual handling, make up around 75% of the health issues. Violence and aggression, that's gone up rapidly. I think under lockdown, and that's causing quite a number of companies a lot of concern. We're just spending a lot of time looking at future changes, new processes, government policy. As I said earlier, there's a blurring of boundaries between waste and recycling, energy production, anaerobic digestion, energy from waste, etc. We've got new technologies we're looking at as well. So that's enzymes, for example, enzymes for recycling plastic. Lithium-ion batteries is a topic that's a lot of work is being done at the moment, because the vast majority of these are sent abroad at the moment, but there are new factories. As we're setting up gigafactories to make them, we're also setting up slightly less glamorous large factories to take them to pieces again. And they are really problematic to take to pieces and dispose of. So there's going to be a lot of work done on that in future. Net zero and the circular economy. So we're doing a lot of work across HSE about that, and waste is an integral part of that. Okay, next slide. Workplace transport. So that's both on-site and during street collections. Ideally, we need better control at source, as it were, by use of technology and so forth. Relying on people to do the right things and not make mistakes is weak, and it's low on the kind of hierarchy of control. You will have seen that illustrated in the vehicle rollaway, and it tends to be a feature of many accidents. Rollaways, well, you've seen what can happen. We've produced the safety alert. We've also produced some revised guidance recently, which incorporates the key learnings from that, which I think is Waste 09. David, you might need to correct me on that. If you're able to Google that, that would be great. It's the kind of recent workplace transport guidance, and visibility, and that's working with manufacturers, but also looking at the quality of standards. So are the standards good enough? And something that's not on that list is noise, and that's where we've done a lot of work in the past, and we need to restart that. That was interrupted by COVID, and again, there's an important point there about to remember about reducing it at source, and that's again working with the manufacturers. Right. So I should say there are only two of us on the team, so we've got our work cut out dealing with all of this. Right. Thank you, Ben, for the next slide. Yeah, okay, so here's a heads up. A new and revised WISH guidance planned for release this year. So concrete walls, which form waste bays. We've got some very extensive, some fairly comprehensive guidance about that coming out. Machinery guarding, so we've got a further waste sheet, that's the high level one, and then we've got 6 to 8 info sheets below that. So that covers all the common machinery like trommels, conveyors, balers, shredders, fragmentizers, that sort of thing. we've got bioaerosols. There'll be a waste sheet and an information document coming out on that shortly, hopefully. Waste 13, which is designing and operating MRFs. That's a revision that's due shortly. And some supervision and competence in street cleansing activities is also, if we can get that out, is also in the priorities. Right, next slide, please. So a few key messages to take away here. Procurement. Lots of you may be, or a number of you may be involved in procuring, letting contracts, procuring fleets, etc. Electric vehicles are becoming a big thing. Many of you will be looking at electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are expensive, which means that they may well be in service for a much longer period of time. And that means it's really important that you get the basics right. So, for example, if you put a reversing camera on an RCV and you have it fitted, this is what I've been quoted at the time, that's around about £150. But if you retrofit it after the event, it's around £450, so 3 times the amount. So please think about what might be options, but actually when you're going out to tender for fleets, but actually think about what the cost of retrofitting might be, and it will generally be quicker and easier to do that. Not to mention you won't have issues with manufacturers saying that warranties are voided if you retrofit things using other installers. Something else to think about: as plant gets more complicated, more technical, it needs a different way of thinking. And what I refer to there is process safety type thinking into running plant and equipment. And you cannot run plant equipment that deals with high pressures, high temperatures, or flammable atmospheres, flammable gases, without rigorous and robust systems. In other words, the kind of process safety system of exhaustively thinking about what could go wrong and planning for it and engineering it and designing it out wherever possible. So management of change, that's both organisational change, but also when you're installing or buying new equipment, or changing how you actually changing the process, putting a new machine into your process. Think about the isolations. If you don't think about the isolations and power supplies and so forth, that can have really significant implications. So people can think items of plant are isolated, and they're in fact not. So classic baler accident: turn the power off, you isolate the conveyor, but you don't isolate the conveyor. Somebody falls, clears the blockage, falls through into the bale chamber, triggers the magic eye, baler operates. That's happened many times. Last one on there is just one word: supervision, but it's a really important issue. And they are, frontline supervisors are key to really ensuring, the systems that you have actually work on site. But it's a really, really difficult role, and they need proper training, and they need to be supported, and they need to be given the time to do the job. So it's a tough role, and it's one where I think the industry could definitely do more to support them. Right, next slide. And I think there's only 2 left after this, I think. So we've come a long way in a very relatively short period of time, but there are many challenges for the future. So I mentioned at the beginning, I've got a sort of, I've spent quite a lot of time working with human factors specialists and working on human factors issues. And I suppose, having given you lots of facts and lots of things, I'd like you to go away and maybe kind of think about a couple of things. And that's primarily, why do people fail or deviate from systems and procedures? And as a clue, it's not because they're bad or they're evil. In fact, they're generally trying to get the job done, which is a very common and universal human trait. So sometimes you have to protect people from their own impulses to be helpful and to get things done quickly as they see it. So you have to think like the frontline operator does, and to do that, you need to talk to the frontline operators and find out what the issues are. So kind of related to that is learning the right accidents from lessons, the right lessons from accidents. So what I mean by that is looking at systems and not just blaming employees or concluding that human error was to blame. What you need to do is put yourself in their shoes and ask why they did what they did, because most of the time, there are a few occasions they did what they thought made sense to them at the time, bearing in mind A, their knowledge, and B, the circumstances. So if I see an accident report that says human error is to blame, my immediate question, and that's where people have stopped the investigation, I suggest that's where you need to continue the investigation and ask critically why that human error occurred. And then, really importantly, change the system that led to that error. Not just blame the employee and say it was lack of training, because even the most competent of us will make mistakes. Almost all of us are drivers. Many of us have been driving for 30, 40 years. We consider ourselves competent, but we can still make mistakes. So actually not, failing to notice something or not perceiving something is not a function of a lack of knowledge. It's a function of a lot of other different things. So actually just retraining people in those instances or saying be more careful is not the answer. If you want a really user-friendly guide, and I thoroughly recommend this to anybody involved in safety, Sidney Decker, really interesting character. I think he was an academic. He was spending a lot of time writing about human error and human failure and human behaviour, particularly in relation to aviation. So he thought, well, I need to kind of really, instead of just being an academic sat in an office talking about this, I need to learn to fly. So he did. So he now splits his time between being a commercial pilot and being an academic. So he has a really, really insightful view about human behaviour and how humans behave and perform in complex systems. I know aircraft cockpits are more complicated than waste and recycling, but a lot of the principles read across. He's also, lots of his stuff on YouTube. He's really engaging, so I'd strongly recommend you have a look at that. And it might give you a different perspective on managing problems and issues. And I think that's it.
Tim, many, many thanks indeed. I'll just pull the curtains because the sunlight is coming straight onto my face. We have sunlight in my part of England at the moment. So, yeah, I've made some notes before I invite all the general questions in. I've got a first of all question. Use the word totters. For those people that don't know what a totter is, what's the totter?
Right, okay, sorry. That's people who are basically hand sorting, sorting out recyclable materials. So a load comes in, it then gets tipped into individual sort of heaps by a loading shovel, and then people literally just sort through it by hand. I mean, it's a practice I think that HSE would probably rather see didn't exist, but it's so widespread, it's kind of pretty difficult to stop it as things stand.
The second that I picked up interesting, you mentioned looking at locking out and guarding. I mean, as someone that comes from the quarry sector, it's very interesting. They've got so much good information through that, and they've got working groups that are continually working on it, on locking out and guarding. In fact, the first set of guarding, when I worked for a company in the West Country, the industry guidance or the company guidance was written by one of your ex-colleagues, Richard Noble, an inspector.
Oh, yeah,
Because Richard was involved in doing the first sets of stuff on that.
Yeah.
So I do think some of the time we are trying to reinvent the wheel, and it's very interesting that the language you've used, the word supervision, we are back to the basics of the Health and Safety at Work Act, aren't we? You know,
yeah,
the right people doing the right thing with the right information being checked on. And so there's some old lessons I think tend to get desexualized, as it were. And the other thing I picked up on you as well about taking the process safety approach.
Yeah.
And those we have got some of my students are actually in the room, believe it or not, today. And we have a module on where we talk about high risk and high hazards industries and sectors.
Yeah.
And I try and get people to look at the best practices from different sectors. So if they were designing a management system or bringing about interventions into the workplace, consider, for example, the regulations on management, as in the quarries regs, about having an appointed manager. In terms of process safety and CDMs, looking at those aspects for designing, proactive designing up front, communications and methods. So rather than seeing these as sector specifics, as good practice in different sectors, and try and get them to apply them across it. And I don't see enough people cross-applying these very good bits of information that maybe on a different pace in the HSE website even. It's quite interesting.
No, I mean, I think you make some good points there. I think, I mean, I've not looked at the quarries guidance, but I think a lot of the guidance that we're kind of creating and producing, and particularly in relation to machinery, is quite long-standing internal documents written by our mechanical engineers. So they're, you know, the provenance is not you know, we're not reinventing it too much. What we're doing is making it fit for the waste industry, as it were. You know, and obviously there's no point in having this internal guidance. It's much better that it's out there.
Okay, going back to the questions from our participants, I got over 300, which is really good today.
Yeah,
I was asked about the campaigns in the pipeline for 2022. That was you covered that in the class. So I'm going to say that's been answered live and do that one. Next one from Mary. I'm interested to hear what changes people are making with the proposed change in ESOS guidance coming in. What changes are you making in phase 3 compared with phase 2? Will you be auditing more sites for phase 3 or the same number? I think, Mary, is ESOS in scope or outside of scope? Because ESOS, I thought, was regarding carbon. ESOS compliance is about compliance in technology. I think that's outside of scope. That's outside of scope for today.
Not ringing any bells.
No, so I thought, I've answered that. If you want to have a session on ESOS, Mary, please, I put my email in the chat. Please come back to me. Next question from Ewan. Quick query on the data. Does the waste and recycling fatal industry rate include public sector activities also? IRC correctly, it was hard to split up the data from a public sector into different local authority activities.
And
is AED waste and recycling sector or agriculture sector? Interesting, Ewan.
I think exactly. It depends on the activity of the employer. I think this is quite complicated, and we did have my stats team did send me a fairly lengthy missive on exactly how, but and so we used a particular example. A driver turned up at a scrap metal site and then used a piece of access equipment to sheet his lorry when he was leaving site, and fell and killed himself. So although he was using the equipment of the scrapyard, he was employed by the transport company, so it went against the transport company. So you can get some weird allocations. So AD almost certainly does not come under SIC 38, 39, I can never remember, which is where the majority of waste comes under. So I'm not actually sure what it does come under, to be honest. But again, that might be, it's not, unless it's a site that only does AD, it will be primarily. So for example, the Avonmouth explosion, that will go under utilities.
Right.
Because that happened at a sewage treatment works.
Okay.
Whereas if you had a site that's solely devoted to AD, so food waste, for example, then yeah, I need to check where that would fall actually. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Okay. Within the AD visits, are there any specific aspects of activity like transport or machinery that you're focusing on?
No, it's so it's very well. The focus is I think there's kind of there's four, thinking, just racking my brain. There's four main elements. One is desire. So that is so that's hazardous area classification, and then what follows from that is procedures and so forth, particularly for things like hot work. There's maintenance, there's control of contractors. Goodness, I'm trying to think what the other areas are now. Yeah, desire, maintenance, control of contractors. Yeah, it escapes me at the moment, but there's some operational guidance on that, which I can, for the work that we've done this year, I'm pretty sure that's in the public domain. So the operational guidance for the coming year will be very, very similar. So I'm very happy to forward the link to the existing guidance if that would help.
If you could do that, it'd be great. And I could put it on the WMG website and share with the CIWM.
Yeah, yeah. With the caveat that there'll be an update. If I remember, I'll try and send you the update when it comes along.
Many thanks indeed. And we can put that on our website as well, actually. Put it up, Ben. It's not your area, I know, Ben, but we'll do what we can to do that. Regards to stress and mental health, this is a bit of a generic one here, Tim, because I remember when the management standards first came out, and that was all the work of Professor Kerry Cooper, wasn't it?
It was,
back in the 2000s, and he's still promoting stress and well-being. I remember the campaign in 2005 and 6 where inspectors did go around looking, many local authorities asking, are you managing stress and mental health? Or interesting, the word stress and mental health has been used in the same sentence, Eric. Is Eric Candy? Because I think the two things, any psychologist will tell you they're two separate things. But the question is, the question more specifically, are you aware of any notices or prosecutions that have come out anywhere in the workplace, anywhere on stress and mental health in the sort of the more recent future?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you for absolute sure there've been none in the waste and recycling sector. Elsewhere, I don't know.
I did the management standards, the original version. It's still on the HSE website, although the caveat is the Excel tool doesn't work. Maybe because the HSE have got a new subscription purchase one with a few more questions. I know that went out about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But I did that with a local authority, and I looked at stress levels amongst different types of employee. And guess who was least stressed? It was management team and the chief exec. Who had the most levels of stress? It was the refuse drivers.
Yeah. Yeah.
One's responsible for the vehicles, closely followed by the loaders. And this is looking at all the 7 components of the management standards. And really, I suggest that rather than ask the question about it, how many of you in the room have tried to use the management standards and use them for different reasons? And I say, I'm happy to talk to people offline about how you can use. I compared yesterday with some of my students, both undergraduate and postgraduate, who come to university on a different arrangement. The undergraduates are in a job, for health and safety job. The postgraduates are international students doing any job, and any job means McDonald's, care homes. And guess which students have the highest scores, or the most negative scores on HSE management standards? It was those people not doing health and safety in the job, those in the insecure work.
Yeah.
So even amongst using the management standards to look at the non-education student experience, I could detect a fault on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, a difference. So these tools then they could be used. Guys play with the tools on the HSE website and just share your experience. I've got another one from Carl here about growing need to reduce waste to landfill is the seeping increase in balers and waste management within other workplace sectors. Here's an old question, Tim. I think you've probably heard a few times, by the way. Do you see the HSE possibly looking for a regulated training programme to be introduced to try to replace the dangers surrounding this ever-increasing task?
Sorry, say that again. Do I see
the HSE possibly looking for a regulated training programme to be introduced to try and reduce the dangers surrounding this ever-increasing task? That's more balers and waste management and other workplace sectors.
No, in short.
Carl, I'm an educator, and there are lots of training companies and educators. What I can say is, and this, I'm entitled to push this because it's an EWMG session, we did actually make something about 5 years ago for every local authority was given about management and supervision of waste. And I'm showing it here in front of the camera if you can see it or not.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And every council, every local authority had it because it was done on the charitable arm. So, you know, there's no reason why a group of people can't come together. If you want the EWMG to do something, we have a whole group of, we have a small group of committee members. We're happy to work with you to develop something on the voluntary basis. Remember, there's no requirement. There's no requirement to specify any training. Employers want the assurance of something, but if you want to develop something based around your own risks, please work and please talk to others. It's just engage with people and work with people. And then share it. And if it's sufficient problems, then maybe it can go to the WISH forum, and the WISH forum can maybe take it up as an industry-specific challenge. That, I think, would be where the concept of WISH is information for the industry by the industry. It's not imposed by the HSE, and I think that's the important thing. So, yeah. Carl, there are contacts. You've got my details. Please make contact if you want to speak to others. Do you have an ISB? Craig, do you have to Google search for the book by Sidney Dekker? We haven't got an ISBN number.
Just type it into Amazon. That's what I do.
The interesting thing about a lot of the stuff people, I mean, people like Sidney Dekker and Eric Holnagal are pushing, yeah. And one or two others are pushing safety 2 and safety differently.
Yeah.
About a different way of doing it. The assumption is that people write health and safety remote from the operation. Yeah. Now, I've never understood that. I worked for a quarry company and we had ISO 9000. ISO 9000 being the quality standard. So all my operation instructions had to include, it wasn't how to start up the piece of plant and another instruction, how to do it safely. It was one instruction. And it was down, I did that with the operators. So again, my advice for this is, and I do feel this, that in certain sectors, when supervisors take responsibility for health and safety, which they should do, and it's probably in their job description anyway, and having spoken to a gentleman called John Spanswick, you come across John, Tim, who was an early one of the HSC commissioners until about 2000, until it was disbanded. He's a health and safety director for Bovis Lendlease, and he made the comment. Do you remember the tower cranes were going over all around the world?
Oh yeah, yeah.
A lot of them were his. So he had a health and safety commissioner with this problem. He was the one that was behind the register for tower cranes.
Yeah, yeah.
And the interesting thing is that John said to me he had not seen an accident anywhere, an accident report, where that would have happened if there'd been a supervisor present. Yeah. And I asked him on LinkedIn last year, does he stand by those words? He says yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So don't, you know, if a company is saying, I want more health and safety advisors to reduce accidents, no, don't employ the health and safety person on one shift. Employ 3 supervisors round the clock, if it's around the clock work, you know.
Or train, you know, train your supervisors and support them, you know, so that they feel that they're backed up, you know, and incentivize them positively, I mean.
Yep, I know. So very quickly, because time is pressing on. Sorry, I've gone on too long with guys, but hopefully I'll help add to the debate. From Tom Mills, I saw a news story on criminal gangs organising extensive fly tipping.
Yeah.
This is more for local authorities, I suppose, but does HSE have any observations on this?
Not really. It is, as you say, it's a kind of local authority, police and EA matter, really. I know that it is a massive problem for the industry, and the industry are extremely exercised by it. If for no other reason than it damages their collective reputation.
Paul from FCC, isn't it, Paul? I think we've spoken before. Very quickly, Tim's slot. Yeah, well, they'll be on the EWMG website. Things will be posted with the recording of today, so you'll have all that. Okay. The next one is there a benchmark of waste sector accident data for local authorities?
I'm quite sure what you mean by benchmark.
No, I think Mumtaz, I worked for, we tried this when I used to chair laws, local authority waste safety. Yeah. I created that, and I had this wonderful goal of we'll share the data. I made contact with over 300 local authorities in the UK over a 10-year period, and we really have people wanted to share data, but people were recording it differently, and then the administration of doing that, because it's not just the fatals you want, and not just the waste sector accidents. Bear in mind, accidents are only about 1/5 of all lost time in the waste sector. There's 4/5 is ill health, work-related ill health. Yeah. And that data, so the amount of bureaucracy involved in creating that for the worth it was, it just didn't happen. So we are limited to what goes to the HSE. And in fairness, the HSE inspectors of waste have always shared with local authorities the data on a regular basis. That it has really been a partnership.
Yeah, I think the other point to note about the data and the stats is that it's often not sufficiently detailed to us and where specifically and what particular types of machine, etc. It's hugely reliant on the quality of people filling in the RIDDOR reports, and I've seen a lot that are pretty economical with the truth. They don't actually lie on there, but they just leave out all the salient issues, so it looks quite innocent. You go along and then you find out that actually it's nothing at all. So it's not great data, but it's the best we've got.
I've got down to the last 3 or 4 questions now. So waste in healthcare has increased tremendously through COVID and extra PPE restrictions, which has caused issues of waste carriers, miscollections due to incinerator failures. How does the HSE manage this, as it causes significant risk for their storage at our hospitals? I don't think HSE would manage it, would they?
No, we don't. That's really an issue for HS for operators to manage.
And this is something about resilience, isn't it, of industry? This is about business continuity and resilience, etc., isn't it? Look at the language in that.
Yeah.
A question from Dean. Do you mention working in previous roles in COMA with waste sites that fall under COMA regs? There are standardised topics you get orders against, i.e. EC&I human factors.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same approach would be beneficial in the waste industry to standardise enforcement across key topics?
Yeah, I possibly, but I think that's a very resource-intensive way of operating, to be honest. And I'm not sure that. I think things are going generally in the right direction. I think if things were going absolutely in reverse and we were getting 100 people killed in the waste industry every year, then I think we would be looking at doing something more radical like. But as I said, the numbers of fatalities have generally gone down quite significantly, probably by about 2/3 in the last 20 years. So it's quite extraordinary. So I think, I'm not saying it I think it probably wouldn't be warranted for the numbers, and particularly given the direction of travel.
Okay, the last 2 questions around stress and mental health. Danielle, has there been any established links proven between poor mental health in the workplace and accidents in the waste sector?
I don't think there's anything specific. I think it will be a general issue. I think there is strong evidence, though, that people with mental health issues tend to suffer more with the kind of there are the psychosocial factors behind MSDs. So I think there's quite a strong correlation there.
And
but that's not peculiar to waste and recycling.
And again, in terms of mental health issues, I think you need to understand I think I looked at the WHO list of mental health lists, and I think it was 7 sides or 8 sides of A4, different conditions that could be perceived as mental health.
Yeah.
I think anybody that's using mental health as a generic term to push a case at work doesn't understand mental health and maybe isn't competent to actually take part in those discussions. So there's something to be leaving you with, what I've just said there, because one or two of you may think you're mental health experts. We have professors and we're doing psychology degrees here and it is a clinical subject very much so. So be very careful when you start putting your toe in that water.
Yeah,
that's a personal thought that no doubt someone at IOSH will tell me off for later for saying it, but I'll stand by that. I will. Tim, I really appreciate that today. It's been a fantastic session, fantastic conversation, which we don't always have a chance to do.
Yeah.
Again, please, those in the room still left, please drop me a line. Someone's done a late Q&A. I want to go for a cup of tea. It's Simon. Yes, Simon, we've all got colds, by the way. And I am COVID negative, by the way. I did check that yesterday. So on that note, I'll wish everybody a good rest of the week and rest of the time. We've got a session on health and safety law next month. I think it's the same date, 23rd of March. So I will see some of you then. Tim, I hope we catch up, if not at Birmingham, if not before. All right.
Okay, brilliant.
Thanks very much, Ben. Thanks
Nice to
very much
see
in the
everybody.
background.